everyone. For this Random Talk Sunday, I thought it would be interesting to discuss something that sort of reflects the previous video, where I discussed Pearl Harbor, that reflects a historical event that took place. And I thought it would be interesting to address the aspect of accuracy within entertainment. Now, I think you can make the argument that the accuracy within entertainment is relatively low. It's probably a little bit more accurate within various books that focus maybe on science or on history. Even if they are historical fiction, there is still some historical truth or context given to the events surrounding the book, but largely within entertainment, in particular movies, television shows, accuracy is usually, I think, something that movie makers don't really focus on. And the reason, I think, is because a lot of times people like to create a spectacle out of history. They like to make history or science seem like it's something that can work in wondrous ways, when really in reality it probably wouldn't work in the same respects. And is it wrong to have an accuracy within entertainment? I don't think there's an easy answer to this. I would say that I think as long as the inaccuracy is not in any way trying to I guess, insult insult what originally, I guess, took place, then I think it's okay, unless, depending too on the genre that you're using. Again, if you're trying to be comical and you're displaying something in history that is probably the opposite of what happened in order to create some kind of satire or comedic effect, then again that's different. But it just depends upon the circumstances, I think, into what you put as inaccurate. So there might be, I think, some disputes as to what exactly should be maintained as accurate and what shouldn't. But I think, really for me, I think it just depends upon how the artist or person uses those inaccuracies. If he uses it to convey some kind of substance within the film or within the story, then I think it's okay, just as long as it's not like overly exaggerated, unless it is meant to be overly exaggerated. So again, there are these kinds of things that that I think could be a detriment to those who really focus within these fields. Like if you are a scientist and you see all of these science fiction films that really don't portray science in a fairly accurate way, or again, this is probably similar for action films with science. Not a whole lot of science going on. A lot of inaccuracy there as to what would happen in a certain scenario. It's the same thing too with history. Again, certain things that did happen aren't presented in the same way as they are in a piece of entertainment. And I think it's all, though, based on how you use it, how you take that piece of work and how you initiate it to the audience. And I think certain inaccuracies, in order to create a story or a interpretation of what actually happened, I think is fine. Again, some people might say that, sometimes we've created these historical figures and we've put them on a pedestal. But I think what we need to understand is we need to separate the actual accuracy of what actually happened with a film, and with art in general, because art is intended to be fantasy. It's just not intended to be reality, unless you're making a documentary, which is something completely different. I'm not sure even if documentaries do have inaccuracies. They probably do. Hence, maybe like Michael Moore's films. But regardless, what I mean by this is that I think that ultimately we should try to separate fiction from reality. And I think the more we understand fiction, the more we can understand reality, because if you look into what was in the film, you might be more interested to know what really were the circumstances in real life, and you'll do the research on your own, and you'll discover, oh, okay, this is what reality was, and this is I think it just broadens human knowledge and understanding between the rational aspects and true nature of a certain circumstance that probably is presented within a film, and the film itself, which is, again, fantasy. It's not reality. Even those films that are based upon people that lived, there's always going to be some kinds of inaccuracies. There's always going to be some kinds of misleading information within film making. And I think it's all designed to build around this fantasy. And it's not necessarily that building around a fantasy, I think, is a bad thing. Like, if we take maybe the moral of a piece of history, and we tell it in a way that brings out the emotions of probably what people felt about that certain circumstance. Again, something like Pearl Harbor, bringing out the emotion, even though the characters are not real. Again, even though it did this poorly, again, what I'm saying is that a film's goal, a piece of artwork's goal, is to get you into that emotional mindset of what the actual event could have been like. It doesn't mean you need to center it around the real actual people that experienced the event, but you can create a fictional world that reflects the emotional things that are somewhat transcendent or the same as reality. So again, I think there is this emotional connection that I think makes a really good adaptation and a good accuracy. Again, for example, a show like The Tudors, I think, has been marked for being sometimes inaccurate as to the certain circumstances between the characters. But when you look at the entire show as a whole, what was really ultimately the show about? It was about Henry the Seventh, I believe, and his life and how he shaped his life, and how he ultimately destroyed the livelihoods of other people. Now, it's not to say that actually in real life he maybe felt guilty or ashamed of the horrible things that he did, but regardless, the show still presents him as this very powerful figure, and it shows the flaws and the nature of power, and how it really destroyed a lot of the people that he associated with, and at the same time it sort of destroyed himself in a way. Even though he's displayed as this grand, leader, he's still an old, crippled, dying man at the end. Regardless of the accuracies, it presents to us an emotional understanding of again, a man who built his whole life upon power and obtaining what he wanted, and then at the end really loses all of that power because of old age and the inability to be that great grand person that he was, and how ultimately that grandness that he had really gets destroyed over time because of his own arrogance. Again, it's all tied in with, I think, moral understandings. If you can present a character, even if it's not accurate to exactly the circumstances of the character, but present the idea of the person, even if it's not reflective of maybe ultimately who the person really was, but of, you know, maybe the consequences and of the life that he ended up choosing, then you sort of see how the emotions behind such a series are reflective of reality and what he ultimately did as a monarch. So again, those are the kinds of examples that I can think of. When it comes to accuracy within science, I'd say that again, movie making is an art form. It's not a science form. It's not designed to be a science form. Again, I think you can make things a little bit more on the realms of realistic. I think there's been an attempt to try to make things a little bit more realistic, but there's always going to be some element of exaggeration. There's always going to be some form of inaccuracy as to how certain things would really work within a real setting. As to whether or not somebody who jumps off someplace could actually live from that height, or, you know, there's just certain perceptions that it's hard to really ultimately tell what could be considered scientifically accurate. But I will say, what makes, again, things like science fiction and action good is the connection to these worlds when it comes to maybe science, even though the science may not be completely accurate. You know, something like Jurassic Park, where science goes out of control, or in like something like Star Trek, where science revolutionizes and pioneers the universe, or the Star Trek universe. I really don't know anything about Star Trek. I'm just using that as an example in regards to science. But I think it's supposed to reflect more of, again, when a film involves science, I think it's more intended to reflect the morals and moral dilemmas with science, as well as the moral things that science does that can improve people's lives and make things easier. And you see how science fiction things sort of save the day. Again, a lot of superheroes are really a scientific experiment, and how ultimately there is a lot of wonder to come out of that experience, and then there's also a lot of struggle. So again, these kinds of scenarios in how we approach our understanding of science, I think is really what movies focus on. And so as to whether or not they're accurate as to how science is not, I think, the point, more so much as to how science is used. Because sometimes science can be used for great and wonderful things, and it can also be destructive in the same sense. So, if not used properly, if causing maybe damage when maybe testing something. So again, there are these things that science tries to present, I think, within films that are just generated to being more plot driven and thematically driven, and not designed to be in any way, shape, or form accurate to actual science, but sort of more could be science. Are there certain things within films that probably display some kind of science and some kind of accuracy towards science? Yes, sure. But I'd say science is really less of a focus with film, because film is more designed to be an art form. So it's really difficult to put in science in a film, especially considering the fact that, science is based within reality. It's more of what we can do, not what we can't do. And film is more about the possibilities, and more of the possibilities of science and what we could do with science to make our world cooler. It's not about how science actually is. So again, I think that's more what film tends to focus on. There probably are some accuracies within film, which I think a lot of older martial arts films that didn't focus on trying to have any special effects or anything would reflect relatively realistic sort of action sequences. But again, film is an art form, it's not a science, so that's kind of hard to do. But ultimately, I think that's really all I can say about the subject. And as to my reasoning as to why I don't think it's really horrible to have inaccuracies, but I do understand the concern that people have with inaccuracies. But I would say that the inaccuracies don't necessarily bother me unless it is openly trying to insult the audience's, I think, intelligence. And again, it depends on what the film is about. It depends on the context. If it just depends on what you're trying to present to your audience. So I think that's really what really factors into determining, I think, what inaccuracies are okay and what inaccuracies are maybe not such a good idea to put in, and so I think that's all up to speculation. But I think ultimately that's really all I can say about this subject. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video, and hopefully there won't be any other problems. I was able to upload my last video, so yay, I hope that there's no more issues. But if there are, I'll be sure to let you know if I can. Thank you all so much for watching, and take care.